Hello, folks, and this is episode 11 of Dissemination Day. It's a couple of days late, my apologies for that. There was some family stuff, good stuff going on at the weekend that just made getting this stuff sorted not possible, so I'm sure none of you are too disappointed. I'm going to talk today about an article by Louis Hagopian that I discovered, Louis Hagopian et al., that I just thought was really, really interesting. When I decided I was going to do it, I think I got a bit carried away. I was like, this is so cool, I'm going to cover this article. And actually, I've decided I'm going to keep this quite short because the complexity of this article either means that I have to describe it in super layman's terms for it to be of any interest to people, or I need to go into proper detail and really explain the science behind it, which I think is going to take like 45 minutes and not our usual 20. So I'm going to go with the super short option and just describe to you what it was that they kind of hypothesized, what it was that they did, and actually what we can learn from it, which I think is the important bit. I've got a lot going on with my hair today. So ultimately, Louis Hagopian, Griffin Rooker, and I think it's Yenokyan wrote this, and it's a great paper. It's really in depth. It makes perfect sense. Like, I understand where their rationale came from. But they had obviously been looking at a sort of area of science that's called precision medicine, which I think is, instead of seeing a particular condition and treating that condition, for example, this person has a cancer of some kind, and therefore we treat that kind of cancer with the known treatment for that cancer. The precision medicine is all about taking into account individual factors, so that person's genetics, that person's existing medical history, and the subtype of cancer that they have, the particular cell mutation, and defining a specific treatment based on all of those individual factors rather than just the overarching condition. And what they were kind of saying is that makes lots of sense in the behaviour analytic world, because we don't just see physical aggression and treat physical aggression, and we don't just see repetitive self-injury and treat that. We see what we call the topography of the behaviour, in other words, what it looks like, whether it's physical aggression or verbal aggression or spitting or hitting or kicking or etc. That is very much just a symptom and not the cause. So we would never treat physical aggression. We would identify that physical aggression is a symptom of communication difficulties, and we would treat the communication difficulties as a means to reducing physical aggression. So the precision medicine has a lot of parallels with what behaviour analysis already kind of tries to achieve. Okay, so I hope you're hanging on here with me. In medicine, they call these things predictive biomarkers. And for example, if a person has a particular kind of cancer and they have a particular gene in their body, that gene might be a predictive biomarker, which means that a particular treatment is going to be more effective for them than for somebody else. Somebody else might be quite different, so it's very individualized. What Hagopian et al. Have done is they have created this idea of a predictive behavioural marker. So if a person is engaging in problem behaviour, can we identify things about them in other ways or about that problem behaviour that will tell us this treatment, whether it's differential reinforcement or non-contingent reinforcement, is going to be more effective than, say, functional communication training. I think that's just such a cool idea, because ultimately, we are all clear in PBS that sometimes we have to try strategies to figure out if they're going to be really effective. We can design and choose a strategy based on the absolute best information we have available, based on the absolute best research available, but ultimately we're still just going to have to wait and see if that really works. We can't be like, yep, this one's for sure the answer. I think that actually a lot of people who are working in PBS, if our strategies aren't effective, we view this as kind of a failure of our strategy or of our assumptions. And rather than viewing that as being like, okay, that one didn't work, what can I learn from that? I can go back to the drawing board and try something else. We quite often, people end up thinking, well, PBS doesn't work. You know, that's clearly the case because this one strategy designed by a positive behaviour support practitioner has been unsuccessful. And I think there's a bit of a danger about that. So I love the idea that there is anything that we can do, anything that we can learn about a person that is going to mean we can have a better chance of picking the right strategy for that individual. And I love the idea that we might be able to learn that for certain individuals, we can treat or design interventions for self-injury that are more likely to be effective more quickly than if we are just kind of trying to learn as we go along. So that is super cool. All right, so basically what these guys did is they kind of thought, well, I bet we can make this work for behaviour analysis. And they decided to look specifically at automatically reinforced self-injurious behaviour. Now, for those of you that are watching these videos and are kind of trying to use them as your own learning opportunities, automatically reinforced means that the behaviour itself is engaging in the behaviour is reinforcing. And sometimes people quantify that under a sensory function. You know, the two terms are sometimes used interchangeably. So what they decided to look at was a number of individuals who had been referred for treatment of automatically reinforced self-injurious behaviour. It's a big mouthful. And try and distinguish factors that rendered particular interventions successful or otherwise. So specifically, they looked at two things. They found two predictive behavioural markers that they decided they were going to look and see if these factors made a particular intervention more or less likely to work. The factors that they looked at were how differentiated was the original functional analysis. Now, there's probably people here going, what in God's name does that even mean? So if you haven't ever completed your own functional analysis or you're not quite sure why that differs from a functional behaviour assessment, let me cover that really quickly. A lot of times people will use the term functional analysis and the term functional assessment interchangeably, and they actually aren't. They're actually separate things. Most of the time, if you're a PBS practitioner in social care systems, what you will be doing is a functional behaviour assessment. You will not be doing functional analysis. Functional behaviour assessment includes interviews and questionnaires and direct observations and staff meetings and, you know, gathering data in all kinds of ways and shapes and forms. Functional analysis is a specific procedure where you deliberately manipulate a person's environment or a specific environment and deliberately alter the result that their behaviour produces. So for example, if I'm working with someone with physical aggression and I really don't understand why this is happening, I might design a condition where that physical aggression results in delivery of attention, and design a condition where that physical aggression results in people removing themselves from the environment. We would design those conditions based on our understanding of the behaviour. There's a lot of research out there about functional analysis, and to be clear, I'm not recommending that you conduct these at all. If anybody is not trained in how to do them, these should be conducted by people who are trained in how to do them. But when I hear people tell me, oh, we did a functional analysis, a lot of the time, they actually haven't. They've done a functional behaviour assessment and they're not clear that that's a separate thing, so that's worth knowing. And in this paper, they are very much talking about functional analysis, not functional behaviour assessment. So when we talk about a functional analysis being differentiated, it means that the results were really clear, that one condition produced a different outcome to another. So if we are taking data on the attention condition, it was super clear that the behaviour occurred much more frequently or an increased rate in that condition than it did in, say, the no demand condition. And that would mean that we can infer a function much more clearly. My dog is barking. Sometimes when we do functional analysis, the results will come back undifferentiated, which means that it's not all that super clear whether or not it was more prevalent in one condition than another. I'm going to show you a graph here of a differentiated functional analysis versus an undifferentiated one, so you can kind of see what I mean. Here we go. So in this paper, they were like, I think if the functional analysis is really differentiated, then that's going to predict that a particular intervention is more likely to be successful than if it's undifferentiated. The other thing that they looked at was what they've called the subtype of automatic self-injurious behaviour. And there were three types. There was one type where the self-injurious behaviour pretty much only occurs when the person is not engaging in attention-mediated activities of some kind. So they're not engaging in other tasks with staff, or they're not engaging in, other fun activities. Type 2 was when the self-injurious behaviour was pretty much occurring across settings. And type 3 was when the person was managing their own self-injurious behaviour with self-restraint. So there was three subtypes. And they reckoned that dependent on the subtype of self-injurious behaviour that the person had, that would infer whether or not the intervention is likely to be successful. So just to summarise that again, two things that they looked at: what subtype of self-injurious behaviour did the person display, and was the functional analysis differentiated? Those were the two factors that they were interested in. The intervention that they chose to assess was non-contingent reinforcement. So did the delivery of non-contingent reinforcement result in a reduction of self-injurious behaviour? And they had guessed, based on their previous results, that it would for subtype 1, but it would not for subtype 2. And they had guessed that it would be more effective for people who had a differentiated functional analysis versus an undifferentiated functional analysis. Just to jump straight to the results, because actually if I was to give you the specific results, they are pretty hard to understand because there's a lot of stats in there. But basically, yeah, they got it pretty bang on, which is so interesting because that means obviously there's more research to be done to determine whether or not other people can get these findings too. But if we know that we are working with a person who is engaging in automatically reinforced self-injurious behaviour, and that it's occurring specifically in some settings, and that it's a subtype 1, meaning that it's not so prevalent when they're engaging in other activities, then that gives us a good reason to believe that this reinforcement strategy is going to be a good choice in terms of intervention, because there's research out there to show that. And actually, they had 37 individuals, 37 people with ASIB who they hypothesized whether or not the intervention was going to be successful, and then looked to see if they had been right. And actually, they got it right the vast majority of the time. I'll show you this little graph here because it kind of makes sense. But if you look at this graph that they gave, any of the dots that land in the grey sections mean they guessed right. Any of the dots that land in the white sections mean they didn't guess right. And you can see that for the vast majority of cases, it wasn't a guess, it was an informed speculation, but they got it right. Which is really cool. These are quite strong findings, and it means that the predictive biomarkers that they had, so that was the subtype and the differentiated functional analysis, were characterised as between good to excellent predictive behavioural markers for response to treatment, meaning that if these things exist, that is a good to excellent indicator that this treatment will be successful. Fantastic. So this was obviously a super complicated paper to have a look at, but actually for behaviour analysts, I think, this is really interesting. Like, I just think it's fascinating. But in recognition of the fact that it's a super complicated one and not maybe that helpful for behaviour practitioners in specific, who are not running functional analysis and who are not at that stage of their experience. So what would I recommend that those individuals take from it, which is of course the point of Dissemination Day? If you weren't clear that functional analysis is a separate procedure, then that's great that you are now. And I would recommend that you go and have a look at some examples of functional analysis and how that's different, and be clear about when you need to refer to somebody with more experience to support you with those procedures. Functional analysis can be a really powerful tool, and if you're working with individuals who have complex behaviour, it may be something that you need to look into being able to provide for those individuals, but not unless you are adequately trained to do so and being supervised by someone who is able to deliver that supervision, because they can go wrong, you can get the results wrong, and ultimately from an ethical perspective you've got to have the right background to be able to conduct these kinds of assessments. The other bit that I think that it's important that we take from it is that we understand that there's kind of markers out there that would indicate whether or not our interventions are more or less likely to be effective. And if we know that, then we can be better practitioners. But if we're completely unaware of that, then we're just, we're not able to really tailor our interventions as much as they should be. And from the kind of dimensions of behaviour analysis, the interventions that we are providing should be the absolute most up-to-date, evidence-based interventions possible. So we've got to stay on top of these kind of things, even if the research is super complicated. So that's what I've taken from it. I hope I kept it short enough. I hope I made it make sense. If anybody's interested in reading the paper, do, because it's fascinating. But just be aware that it is quite a lot to get your head around. All right, guys, take care.